Few things in Dungeons & Dragons are capable of falling quite as flat as a poorly executed puzzle, because for all of the effort that you put into it, there's absolutely no guarantee that it's going to be well received, understood, or honestly, even completed. And if you've been playing the game for a while, you are probably very familiar with the plethora of memes all about running puzzles in Dungeons & Dragons, but I've got a little bit of a hot take for you. It's probably not your player's fault. But for real, let me know in the comments down below what you think about running puzzles in Dungeons & Dragons. Do you absolutely love them? Do you completely hate them, and have you given up on them? I'm really curious to find out. I'm also running a giveaway right now where I'm giving away not 1, but 2 copies of Critical Role Call of the Netherdeep, so be sure to check the link in the description, and I'll also leave a card somewhere here if you want to check that out. Puzzles actually fall into a really interesting spot in Dungeons & Dragons because for all the talk and the discussion that we have about immersion and staying in character, puzzles usually rely on testing the individual players themselves rather than the characters that they're playing, which is something of a disconnect from just about everything else in the game. It's not even that it's necessarily a bad thing, it's just sort of the way that it plays out. So with that in mind, I've got 6 tips to help you run puzzles more effectively in your game to hopefully let you and your players enjoy this wonderful staple of the franchise. Number 1 is to try and challenge the character rather than the player. This first one goes right back to what we were just talking about, where the reality of most puzzles is really that they are testing the individual person rather than the character that they are playing. To expand on this a little bit, I do think that it is actually perfectly fine to test both the character and the players simultaneously, but when you're actually sitting down to design a puzzle and try and incorporate it into your campaign, I would certainly make an effort to consider who the actual characters are that are going to be engaging with this puzzle rather than their human counterparts. With that being said though, when it's actually happening in the game, do not worry about whether it's the player or the character who's actually engaging in solving the puzzle. At that point, it's really not nearly as important. So you can accomplish this goal in a few different ways, and my best recommendations are to consider what is your party good at, how can your player characters work together, and is there a key item in the mix that you also need to be thinking about. I have seen countless puzzles that boil down to basic pattern recognition or some kind of a math or word problem, and while there's nothing necessarily wrong with these, they might not really feel all that fulfilling or engaging to actually solve in the moment. You should take some time to consider the various abilities and the powers that your party has available to them and how you can actually incorporate that into the puzzle solving process itself. Maybe there's a few words that are sort of hidden around the room that need to be repeated in a very specific order to be able to get access and unlock the door that's in front of them, but perhaps these words are written in a language that only one of your characters knows, or maybe it's in a language that none of your characters knows, but one of them has access to the comprehend language's spell. But to take that even further, maybe to even see these words in the first place, someone must have cast the detect magic spell or detect secrets, or maybe actually use that wand of secrets that they found 4 sessions ago. Maybe there's some sort of a strength-related puzzle that can only be completed by a barbarian who is currently in a rage. Perhaps you include a visage of a ferocious creature with red eyes to sort of subtly suggest that maybe that is part of the solution. While these are some pretty rudimentary and simple examples, I'm sure you can grasp the idea here that you should definitely be trying to focus on what your party physically has and what they are capable of. My second tip for running puzzles is to allow improvised solutions. We have absolutely all been there as a DM. Your players are coming up with this incredible solution, they're feeling great, they're feeling so pumped, they're feeling clever and creative, and like they've totally got this in the bag, and then they go ahead and they pull the trigger on that solution only for you to tell them that no, nothing happens. This is usually the single most deflating moment of the entire puzzle solving experience because they've gone through so much work and effort to get to this point, only for them to not actually have accomplished anything. They instantly sort of feel like they're not going to get anywhere with it. What I really suggest in situations like this is that unless the solution that they came up with dramatically affects the overarching narrative of the story that you're creating, maybe just give them the W here. Now, this is certainly not always appropriate. There may be occasions where there is only one specific solution to a puzzle, and it absolutely has to be like that for logical and consistency reasons, and that is totally fine, but I have definitely found the majority of times that's not really the case. As I've said many times on this channel, one of my fundamental tenets for the game is making my players feel creative, empowered, and engaged. And if they come up with a genuinely logical solution to the puzzle that does not completely shatter the narrative that we've created, and it works within the context clues that they have been provided, I'm probably going to let them have it. Another slight variation on this tip that you can use is to actually design multiple solutions to the puzzle of varying difficulty levels and sort of scale the reward that you provide your party based on the solution that they come up with. This is definitely something that can be pretty difficult to achieve, as it will take some extra planning time, and there's also still no guarantee that they're going to come up with any of the multitude of solutions that you provide. However, it really can be worthwhile if you do really enjoy having that feeling of having a little bit more control over a situation. My third tip is to repeat key information. Puzzles are not a contest. Yes, you want to be challenging the lateral thinking of your party, and you want to reward them for taking some great notes or really paying attention like 15 sessions ago, but you need to not forget that your party successfully solving a puzzle is not a loss for you as a DM. So I really don't want to give away too many campaign spoilers here, but I'm actually currently playing in a Tomb of Annihilation campaign, and relatively early on, for those of you who have played it, there is something of a stacking puzzle that takes place in the game. Now, the DM here is actually one of my players, and he is still relatively new to the whole DMing thing, but he did a great job of reminding us of key details and repeating parts of the riddle and drawing our attention to certain aspects of the room. Now, we still failed spectacularly, but it wasn't his fault. So a good chunk of this ties back in with the first tip, actually. Remember that you are trying to be testing the character rather than the player, or maybe you're doing some combination of the two. Repeating key details or a little bit of information does not mean that you're actually giving away any answers. You have to remember that you are sitting there staring at the answer. They're not. What you're doing is helping them get a better visual understanding for the context of the room, or components of the puzzle, or maybe even parts of a preceding riddle that might have occurred. All these things are really, really helpful in actually letting your party feel successful in accomplishing this puzzle. Tip number 4 is a little bit of a maybe. I would say generally avoid hiding plot information behind a puzzle. Now, this might absolutely not be the case, and there certainly can be points in your campaign where the next major plot point is hidden behind some kind of a puzzle, and that is not necessarily a bad thing, provided that it has been contextualized properly. Maybe your group has been solving various pieces of this large puzzle over time. They've either been collecting artifacts or gathering runes or things like that might help them get beyond this barrier. That is awesome. That allows your party to have a feeling of progression where there was once a feeling of total confusion. But with that being said, as a general rule, if you have a room that your party can just sort of stumble upon and it is necessary and critical to their advancement within the plot, you should probably reconsider. Your group might not have the tools necessary to complete a particular puzzle, or they might even decide to completely abandon it if they're feeling stumped by it. And again, this might be totally okay if it's part of some larger overarching puzzle that sort of ties back in with a series of smaller ones, kind of like I mentioned earlier in this point. But if it's not, and it's really just something of an artificial gate to progression, I'd probably steer away from it. Tip number 5 is to use something called a hint check. This one actually comes right from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, which, starting on page 171, actually has an entire section dedicated to puzzles. It's amazing. In this section, they advise the use of something called a hint check, which is a really nice and elegant idea that really helps to engage and challenge the character over the player. Now, while they do provide some hint checks for the puzzles that they have created and presented within the book, the general concept is that if you feel like your party needs one, or if a member of your group has actually asked for a hint, if there's someone who is proficient in a particular ability, you can have them roll an ability check related to that to see if they can obtain something of a hint. Now, that definitely sounds super convoluted, but I promise it's actually really not. If you have a party member who is proficient in, say, perception, for example, you might have them roll a DC 10 perception check, which might reveal that the colors of the tiles in the room are particularly important to the solution of the puzzle. Maybe a DC 15 investigation check might reveal that there are small grooves on a pedestal that are only capable of fitting exactly one thing. You are absolutely free to come up with your own hint checks, and I would strongly recommend utilizing checks that are outside of just simple perception and investigation. Using a wide variety of checks and abilities can really help include as many of your party members in the puzzle solving process. Number 6, the final tip, is really just a very, very simple one. Not every puzzle needs to be some super long, complicated, involved Da Vinci Code style thing. Sometimes the puzzle is just as simple as lighting every torch in the room, just like every Zelda game ever. So let me know in the comments below what you guys think about puzzles, if you have any particular ones that you love or hate. And again, be sure to enter in the giveaway to win a copy of Critical Role: Call of the Netherdeep. But until the next one, take care.